Hello, everyone. Welcome to another installment of Open Air presented by the Harvey B. Gantt Center in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm Dexter Wimberly, and we have an incredible guest today. Nona Faustine was drawn to photography at an early age through family photo albums and fittingly received her first camera as a gift from her uncle. She saw the medium as merely a hobby until her parents showed her monographs and photographs of photographers such as Diane Arbus, Richard Avedon, and Ernst Haas. Although rooted in this initial introduction to documentary photography, Faustine has expanded her practice to play with modes of conceptualism and emphasize the contributions of Black womanhood across generations. Faustine is best known for photographs in which she stages herself often nude, aside from white heels, in front of sites associated with chattel slavery in New York City. In doing so, she reveals the incomplete histories of people whose existence and contributions. Through inserting her own body into the history of architecture of New York City, she brings attention to the ways that marginalized communities, particularly Black women, experienced and resisted the horrors of enslavement, and that they continue to carry its legacies today. Faustine is a graduate of the School of Visual Arts and the International Center of Photography Bard College program. In 2019, Faustine received a New York State Council for the Arts and New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, the Colleen Brown Art Prize, and the Anonymous Was a Woman grant. Her first solo museum exhibition, White Shoes, was on view earlier this year at Brooklyn Museum in New York City. Nona's work is included in Becoming the Sea, currently on view at the Harvey B. Gantt Center through January 2025. Becoming the Sea includes 12 artists who participated in the first 2 years of the Black Rock Senegal residency. Without further ado, please please join me in welcoming Nona Faustine to today's Open Air. How are
Hi,
you?
thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Dexter, and all you out there in the internet world. And you did a very good job on your homework, especially that early part of my history and becoming an artist. My uncle gave me that camera, that little Brownie camera at age 4, and I still have my first pictures that I took of it. And it's funny, I would see this Polaroid camera picture. It was a picture, a portrait of my mother holding my baby sister. You can't see my mother, but it's all my baby sister in her lap. And I was drawn to this picture over and over the years until she told me that was your first picture. And then there's another picture of me at that age. I guess either my uncle took it or someone took it, and there I am with pigtails. So I have both of those pictures of that day, which is incredible. So that's quite remarkable still to me.
Well, I've known of you and your work for probably about a decade, I would say, give or take. And so, for a lot of people joining us today, maybe they were first introduced to your work in the past couple of years. So it's good to go back in time a little bit and talk about the formative years and sort of how you came into making the kind of work that you've become known for. Before we started today, you mentioned the fact that you and I first met each other about 8 years ago in New York City, in Brooklyn, which is where you're from, actually. Brooklyn also happens to be where I'm from. And so I know we have a lot of sort of common experiences growing up, but of course, a lot in the world has changed in our adult lives. And so I just want to talk a little bit about you making that transition from seeing photography as a hobby to pursuing it as a career. Sort of what was the shift in your thinking about photography as a medium, and do you remember what you were thinking around that time?
Photography was always present in my life. Always. I took early classes in elementary school. I took in high school. I just thought it was something that I kept doing. My father was an amateur photographer. So that part was present, and as you stated in the beginning, the family images, the family album books that he had, started to fill. Their first with their wedding album, which is a thing of beauty. I must donate this to the Schomburg or somebody or the Brooklyn Museum one day. So photography was always present. I was always taking courses, and then it was after graduating high school. I didn't get into SVA right away. I spent a year community service, community college for 6 months. One semester really dropped out. I was like, this is not the place for me. And I roamed Dumbo at that time. It was just nothing was there except these old factories, and I would roam Dumbo taking pictures. And then finally I got enough pictures of the city to make a portfolio, and decided I heard about SVA, and I decided to apply. So from there, that was my the really grounding of, hey, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna be an artist. But once I graduated, i didn't have a I didn't have a support. They don't tell you what to do after you graduate, at least back then. How to survive as an artist, how to build a community for yourself, how to stay in touch with the business of photography. And I fell flat on my face. So I just took administratively worked in the arts for years until I had my daughter, and I got laid off in the financial crisis of '08 and 2009. I thought it was a gift from God that, my only child, I spent 2 years with her until finally I got a wake up call from my family telling me, you need to go back to photography. That's who you are. You're the most talent. My sister said, you're the most talented person I know, and you're wasting it. I wish I knew what it was I was meant to do. You have that. And then I was like, okay. And I couldn't find a job. My daughter was 2. I applied to my alma mater, SVA. They took my application and threw it in a bin, and then told me it was incomplete. I applied for BARD, and they put me on the wait list, ICP master's program, which was hilarious to me. But then they accepted me. And then there really is when that shift changed, because there was a big gap between undergrad and grad. I have been out of school many, many years, but living life, learning, seeing. And I believe that education in between undergrad and grad was what made me a complete artist and human being, because I came into the program a fully formed human being, but I had things that I had uh, there was a chunk that I had missing of artists and what had been going on in contemporary art world, really. And so I was older, but my classmates, they were younger and they knew more, and they did help me. They were some of the most, and I'll give them credit for that. They were some of the most talented artists that I knew and came across. And then that's when the shift, everything that I had learned and knew, I took and brought it in that last year. That first year, I was like learning the, technical stuff. But by the end of the first year, everything that I had knew about New York and the artists that I loved and who I was as a photographer. And then that summer, I had the eureka moment of conceptual photography. I always loved conceptual art, but I didn't know, how to use it exactly. And one at that summer, before going into second year and coming up with the thesis, boom, it all came together. And that's how I feel like I'm the artist that you see today.
Lot Thanks for sharing that. A lot to sort of unpack and think about. I mean, I particularly want to explore like what your sort of thinking was, like what those life experiences brought to your work that you might not have had otherwise. I mean, that space between undergrad and grad that you mentioned, where you were kind of coming in, as you mentioned, you used the term fully formed human being, and I love that because I think that the life experiences you had sort of created perhaps more urgency around what you needed to do, and perhaps even more clarity. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because, there were people who had come straight out of undergrad into graduate school. And I remember the photographer Marilyn Nance when I interned for her many years ago, in SVA, saying she was doing her graduate, had two babies, and she was doing her graduate in Maryland. And she was saying, we don't want nobody who just came out of undergrad and talk about graduate school. But then by the time I came to graduate school, that whole philosophy had changed. You could come out of undergrad and go into graduate school, but I wasn't one of those people. And so, I just took it as that. All that experience that I did have, it became a plus. It became an ace in my pocket that they didn't have, you see. So when it came time to thinking about, I always thought like this: I'm here to start a career. I'm not here to play around. I done played around. So when I leave this program, when I leave this program, I want to make a life for myself as an artist. Okay, I can't fall on my face again. I fell on my face, and I'm willing to sacrifice. Um, and so for many years, even after, I didn't have no money, but I took every show that I believed in. I exhibited my work. Every show that I thought I fit in, and it could have been a hole in the wall. One was in Bushwick. You crawled up the steps, and this was before Bushwick was real hot, But there was people coming in. There was little galleries coming in that was very passionate, and they wanted me for a show. If I believed in the show, I did. So it was like that, and I built. Someone had told me, like a director at Smack Mellon, where we first met. She was like, you gotta hit the street running. You gotta build your CV, and that's, I never forgot that. And so I would do interviews. I know some people was like, you gotta pay me to do an interview. Who gonna pay emerging artists for interviews? They're not gonna do that. So I paid my dues out there. Let's put it like that. I paid my dues after I graduated from the and it did pay off. I was blessed. I was lucky that all of that sacrifice did pay off. But also the work had to be there. The work had to be good.
Right,
And I'm
right,
I'm grateful. That's why they was coming to me, for one, that the work was good enough.
right. And let's talk about that shift from sort of documentary photography to more conceptual work as well, because I think you're known, obviously, you're known for the more conceptual work. As I mentioned in your introduction, you recently had solo museum show at Brooklyn Museum, which was rooted in it called White Shoes, which is rooted in the conceptual work. But putting yourself in your work the way that you do, there had to be a moment of bravery, a moment of vulnerability, a moment of like, this is the way I want to tell these stories. And and not everyone's capable of doing that. I mean, let's call it, call it like it is. Where did that bravery come from?
Whew, yeah, it took a lot of growth. It took growth. It took looking at society. It took learning about the history of photography and art. It took a little bit of anger was in there, but a lot of joy, a lot of joy. I had just become a mother. That was my dream to have a baby. And I brought into the world this little girl, and she changed my life. She made me brave. She made me able to do that. When you see me in white shoes, those first images on the rocks off the Atlantic in Brooklyn at Coney Island, and then further, into the city. She made me reclaim my womanhood. I was never like that. If you had told me I was gonna be out there with my on the streets of New York naked in some white pumps, I would have lied. I would have just died laughing, because that was never me. I was very conservative about my body, and I would always, wear jackets even in the summer, because I'm a very curvy, busty girl, and I was like, but once I had a baby, I became free. I became confident. I became brave, and I knew also in my work that it took it was going to take something unique that people had never seen before, quite like, if I wanted to what I wanted to say, I had to capture their attention, not in a spectacle. It had to be sincere. I was putting my heart out there. And what you see is a woman who is putting her heart out there, who's been through some things, but who understands and who knows who she is. And so I brought all that to the series. And then the history of New York, that just came later. That came immediately. That was all of it came at the same time, like poof. The ideas were multi-layered, and they would the history part was there. But going back to documentary, it was who I was. I admired those documentary photographers, Gordon Parks and all of them, Helen Levitt, who photographed the streets of New York City. And I thought that's who I was going to be: street photographer, documentary. But that era kind of had passed. By the time I graduated from undergrad and and then of course, but by the time I got to graduate school, that era really had passed. That wasn't you could so I found a way to combine documentary, fine art, and conceptual photography in that series. And it was a gift from the ancestors to me, because I felt them calling to this history that I knew and I would walk through every day in New York City. And I was like, why aren't people to talk? People need to know this. They need to know this history. And I would try. It scared me. It really scared me to do this project, but it was something wouldn't go away. I would tell my mother, and she was like, I wouldn't do this if I was you. But every time I tried to put it away and say no, it would come back. So it was my love of all these things within photography, the history, also a concentration on Black women in slavery. We got literature about it, we got great books about it, but we don't see it visually. We don't hear about their stories a lot visually and painting and so I felt like that was important. That was something that when you walk into museums, I wanted people to see that story on the walls. I also wanted someone to see a dark skinned plus size woman like me being represented for those stories. I didn't want to use someone else because I felt that that would be exploitation. And I knew that I would be available anytime, day and night, to take pictures. So I wouldn't have to pay someone. So it was just a logical step to choose myself. But it scared me. Every time I got out there to do it, the threat of arrest, the threat of violence, the threat, some days I couldn't get out of the bed to go to the sites, and something would say, not today, not today. And I would frustrate my sister, who was my photo assistant. But then some days a voice would say, now, do it now, do it now. And I would go and I would be rewarded. And so, it was remarkable.
Well, there's so much about the work that you do that is, sort of intuitive and also like deeply personal. And because you are in many ways putting yourself in as the, you're not the subject, obviously you're dealing with large big topics, but you're putting yourself as the figure in your work. So certainly the way you feel the day that you're going to do a shoot, it's important that you feel good that day. It's important that you feel like it's the right day to do it, because you're the one that's in the end that's going to be in the image, right? So you have to be in the right state of mind, which affects your body, which affects, I even believe the aura of what's happening. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One is, one, you kind of, I'll start here since you kind of mentioned it recently, then I'll get to the other topic. And one is the immediate reaction that you got after the first time you photographed yourself, you know, nude in the cities. Like, what was the reaction to the first people you showed those images to? Was it family first that you showed those images to, or was it like a potential like gallery or something like that?
I was in school, so the first images when we came back the second year grad, and I did not. I knew the mo at my school. I knew, it was a small class. It was about 13 of us, and I knew, like, I was very protective of showing these images. The first set of images was out on the beach in Coney Island, and faces the Atlantic, so it's very significant. I didn't want to show them, but I did show my mom a couple of them. And I remember the first one that I really showed her was the one of me at the Tweed Courthouse on Chambers Street going up the steps with the shackle in my hand. I remember us laughing at that one because it was just so, even for me, I don't know, like I had never seen myself like that, and it was so bold, and, my body and everything. And, but then I would show a couple of people in my class that I trusted. And, they the reaction, I knew it was powerful. But sometimes you just gotta hold on. Don't share. For me, I didn't want to. I was like, don't share these with too many people. I did tell Nayland Blake, who was director of the program, I did tell him what I was going to do early on, and he gave me some advice. He said, that they think people who take their clothes off in public are crazy. So he said, you're going against society norms, basically. And so he said, when you get out there, he was like, you no fiddling around with the camera. You be quick. And that was a good let because threat of arrest and blah, blah, blah. And at that time, 2012, we Obama was in office, but it was very, very hard for Black people in the street. Black men and women and children were getting killed. And so, any thing, any what do you call it, relationship or interaction with the police, you just never knew what was going to happen. And here I am in the street naked, trying to photograph for my beliefs, ain't gonna may not work out well. So he gave me that advice. So there was a couple of people along the way, but I believe, like I told you, I believe so passionately in this project, it would not go away. It would not go away.
Right. 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 So the other thing I wanted to talk about, and you mentioned this, is slavery in New York City, right? Just as a topic, right? For a moment, because there's a lot more for us to discuss. But the education system, at least when I was in school, coming up and going to school in New York, in Brooklyn mostly, did a really good job of making it seem as if slavery was relegated to the South, and
Hmm.
did a really good job of painting this picture of places like New York City, for example, as these like bastions of freedom for people regardless of their background. And this was like that, elementary, middle school, high school education. Of course, when you get into college and you start unpacking more complicated issues, you start realizing, wait a second, there's a lot more
Well,
going on, meets the eye of what you've been taught. But I was moved by your work for a number of reasons, but one of those main reasons is that it reminds people that the struggle for freedom, that not just Black people, but in this case, Black people had to kind of continue to go through, was nationwide. It wasn't just relegated to the Confederate States, that it was something that was happening everywhere. There was a great exhibition at New York Historical Society many years ago called Slavery in New York, which on the surface shocked a lot of people because they thought that that was sort of like you know just not the case, right? So when you were doing your research for this body of work, the White Shoes body of work, how did you go about the research for this? Like you're using locations and buildings in New York City as these site specific places to tell these stories. Can you talk a little bit about your research process?
it started in undergrad. I took a course. Well, first, as a New Yorker, I was always wondering what was there before, what was there in the past, what was this building, history was always, and that comes from also my dad, who passed down a love of history. He's from the South. He has a thick Southern accent, but he's not stupid, and he always talked about history in the home. So I guess, granted, I was a child who was drawn to that. I wanted to be an archaeologist. And so, walking around the city, I always ask these questions to myself. And then it was the class in undergrad that I took. SVA had an incredible curriculum for artists, wanted you to be very well grounded. And I took a course called Archaeology in New York. And at that time, I produced a paper that charted the Black presence in New York City from colonial times until now, showing how we, lower Manhattan, every inch of Manhattan we have occupied. And so I never forgot that. Then, boom, you find that there's 15 to 20,000 bodies underneath the street of Lower Manhattan, Black women, men, African men, women, and children, in a cemetery that was once closed, put 25 feet of landfill on top. How did we not know this? That New York City was one of the largest slaveholding states outside of the South. We were one of the last states to join the Union side, and that we almost fought on the Confederate side because so many slave owners brought vacation here, did business here, brought their slaves here. And so all of that, along with finding the African burial ground, the activism that showed up, that made the federal government scale back that building and not continue to desecrate the graves of enslaved people. All of that stayed with me, and so I carried that history with me. And yeah, in school, we were taught that, just what you just said. But it was funny. It depends on what school you went to, because my sister in elementary had teachers. These were Jewish teachers now in public school out in Midwood that told her the truth. So it all depended on what school you went to and what teachers you had. And the things she told me, I was fascinated. I was like, they didn't tell us that. I had, like you, we were under this assumption that New York City and New York State was a free utopia, but that was not the case.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you mentioned Dumbo. I lived in Brooklyn Heights for many years ago, and I would walk through Dumbo in I guess that would have been early '90s, before all of that development over there. And you could even see little remnants of the cotton trade, right? In places like Dumbo, which sort of like really messes with people's minds when they realize, yeah, that it was all like sort of like interconnected. So you've been traveling a lot, of course, with your success in your career, and I'm curious to sort of hear, how's your work been received by people who don't even know these histories, or not aware of these histories? I mean, of course, there's probably been many experiences you've had talking to people, but does anything come to mind, sort of an interesting conversation or encounter you might have had about this work that you're doing?
Oh yeah, I mean, I could write a book now. First of all, it blew the top off of people not knowing the history of the United States and the history of New York City in particular. New York City made a lot of money off the slave trade. And I believe that after the Civil War, they attempted to cover that. They not, I believe it's in the archive, it's documented. They did everything they could to cover this history up and the involvement. And so people are just shocked. I didn't know that. Wow, even coming to the show at the Brooklyn Museum this summer, again, brought it into the mainstream. I had a book the year before published through Mac, but yeah, people even outside of the United States. I'm in Italy right now. I've been living there for 4 months off and on, traveling back and forth between New York and Rome, doing the American Academy in Rome. And the Italians, they put me on the front page of Le Repubblica last year, talking about the work. France, Germany, I did a show in Germany. Brazil, I have a lot of fans in Brazil, and Brazil really close to my heart. The Brazilians have a similar history, and the Black Brazilians reach out to me. They know me. They follow me on social media because they're struggling to also fight and bring their history, which is very similar, and almost like they're going through a civil rights movement. And so, yeah, this history has been whitewashed, covered up, but scholars, historians have been for decades doing this work. They've been writing books, black and white, writing books. You have painters, also artists, visual artists who have also been talking about this topic. But I think I was on the cusp of bringing it forth in a different this particular topic of slavery in New York City, bringing it forth and adding to the piece to the puzzle. As Nayland Blake told me, if you think you're trying to add a piece to the puzzle, you can forget it. And I was like, no, I am going to add my piece to the puzzle, and this is going to.
Well, I think well, a few things. I think number one, because of the importance of the work you do and the times that we're living in, I think it's safe to say that you have been written into history. I don't think that that's a stretch. I mean, I think that if you stop making work today, I think what you've already done is part of not just art history, but I think it's part of American history. So, I mean, that's my opinion. I also think my pleasure. I also think that it's interesting to talk about these international experiences, right? Before we got started today, we were talking about where I am. I'm here in Japan. You're traveling a lot. I've been fortunate enough to do exhibitions in different parts of the world over the past, decade, and it's interesting to see how certain topics are um, uh, with the response to certain topics when you get outside of the United States. In a way, people are more willing to have conversations about certain things outside of the U.S. and in some cases than they are willing to have here. Well, there. I'm not there, but there. You get my point. And
Yeah.
and so how has your, it seems that I already know the answer. It's been received really well, but how has your work been received outside of the U.S. compared to the U.S.? If there's even is there a comparison to make in your opinion?
I think I'm still the new kid on the block in a way, but they know about me. Definitely in Africa. Africa was when the work really went viral in 2015, 2016. Africa, I heard from Africa, all these people, they saw part of the work, they responded. African artists certainly know about me. Sometimes it's surprising because I don't. For a moment, I forget I'm the face that people know my face, and so they're like, "I know you," and I'm like, "Really?" And then I'm like, "Oh, okay, yeah,
Well,
okay,
that's very interesting, Nona, because and that's a great point. And so it's two things I want to, well, three things I want to do right now. All right, one is I know we have some images, so I want to have the magicians behind the scene. They can cue up the first image. The second thing is I want to talk about that point you just made. Like you're in your work, right? So unlike a lot of other artists, contemporary artists that I talk to, whether they are painters or even photographers, they can walk down the street,
right,
and unless you're sort of in the art world, you don't know who they are, right?
right,
uh,
right."
but in your case, your face has been seen by millions and millions of people because of your shows and social media and other publications. So how do you separate yourself, if at all, from that? Because or are you or another way of framing this question is, are you the person in the images, or are you a vessel for the story you want to tell? I guess that's the question.
Both. I am a vessel and I am the person in the images. It is particularly in the White Shoes is partly autobiographical in that I am a native New Yorker. I'm a descendant daughter of enslaved people and First Nation people, and so I'm not playing a slave or something like that. I am myself, Nona Faustine. When I'm walking in the street, I don't even realize that I'm just a regular. Like I'm on the train, I'm on the bus, I'm a regular person. I don't look at myself as somebody, like famous or something like that. I don't know what that is. Sometimes people stare at me and I'll be like, I'm just like, why are they staring at me? Like, and then sometimes it clicked. Maybe they seen me before. The only thing is one time I was on the subway and somebody recognized my daughter from but they knew who I was too. And they were like, yeah, that's your daughter. I've seen her in your work. And I was like, oh, okay. So they recognize my daughter and mention her first. But yeah, I don't even see myself like that. I go about my life as a regular person. And, if you know who I am, like even at the Academy in Rome, people, we have visiting artists, and they be like, hi, I know you, some of the women, some of the artists, and they be like, I couldn't believe you was here. I was so excited to meet you. And I was like, oh, like I'm kind of I just operate on another level sometimes. I don't see myself like that. So I
Right.
guess it makes it easier for me to navigate. But yeah, in the work, they're self portraits. They're me. I'd be crazy to say I'm someone else. I'm not someone else. I'm absolutely, like what you said, a vessel. And these are my thoughts. These are my my poetry, if you will. Um, from the heart, my feelings, my emotions, and that's how I represent them.
So we had some questions that have come in the chat, which we will get to before we wrap up today. But let's talk about the image that's on screen now. Maybe you can just take a couple minutes and just explain what we're seeing here from your perspective.
Okay, so the images that I gave you were shot during my residency in Black Rock in 2020, right before the pandemic. I got out of Dakar, Senegal, right before the pandemic in 2020. And so these images were basically shot in 1 week. And I had spent a month in the residency. And most people have not seen these images. That's why that everything has been focused on white shoes on my country. And I've been waiting for the right moment to really debut these images. Unfortunately, the pandemic and all of that. So now these images are getting out there, being published in books. Los Angeles County Museum acquired the one that you showed on your page at IG. They purchased that in 2023, and other publications are coming out and showing them. But this images was taken. They were taken in places that over the residency endeared themselves to me and became very important to me. Site specific, excuse me, specific in places. And so this one was um, a guy who was a sculptor, and he had a sculpture garden, and he had all these sculptures, and this is, I would pass by this place all the time, in a car. And finally I asked if I could photograph there, and he had this old tree, and it was so sculptural and beautiful. And that's the thing about Africa; everywhere is sculpture, color, and I use my body as sculpture, and
Mm.
in all the series, White Shoes and this, my body is. I love sculpture. Period. African sculpture, Greek sculpture, all of that is very, and it's in the work, and so I just gravitated to this channel, and it brought up emotions about being African American, and being, your heart being in two places at one time. Are you American or African? Are you African American? And I found that I'm both. My heart and is in two places. My home is in two places, Africa and the United States, and that's okay. And but I meld. It was about melding my body and presence in at that point. And this is this tree where I found a way to meld my body to it. And I had my assistant was the great Jose Ramon. He's a clothing designer, artist, visual artist. And this material that I had been working with in the white shoes I brought to Africa, I almost didn't bring it. And something said, throw it in a suitcase. And I was able to he was able to just meld it over my body in different ways that I hadn't been doing. So I want to give him credit for that.
Well, it's beautiful. Let's go to the next image because I did have some questions like about like the technical side of how you're creating these images. So you're working. You obviously you're working with assistants. It would be, I wouldn't say impossible, but very difficult to do this work without some sort of like technical assistance because of the lighting and you have to pose and what have you. What's the significance of the gold that you're wearing?
It is a material that signifies, for me, goddess, God, royalty, and when I saw it, I just loved it. And it's so, the material, I love textiles, and I just happened to find this textile that worked, that symbolized everything I thought of, as this matriarchal goddess, character, the feminine divine. And my setup is very, I my setup is very simple. I can do these images without an assistant. When I did a residency at Yaddo, I photographed myself without an assistant. I had a remote. In the beginning of White Shoes, one of the first images of me with the crown and the white gloves sitting, that was done with remote. But it takes one layer off when you are in these busy areas, or out, I set up the camera and I do all the work myself. I compose the image, and then I step in. Sometimes, like with the white shoes, I would have my sister as,
Hmm.
she's me, and take a picture of her just to get an idea where I was standing. And she comes
Mhm.
out. I go in. People know that story. And so it was the same when I got to Dakar. I would compose the image and just step in and have, whoever I was with hit the shutter for me on my command, come back, check my photo. I got it, or I need to do again, make adjustments. So in this images, Usame Sao Museum, and it was down the road from the car, from Black Rock. And I discovered. Well, he was new to me, and it was an incredible place. And so I got this image, and in the corner is Jose Ramon. He's sitting there, but the whole conception and ideas of all the images are my own.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love the formal qualities of this particular image as well. The architecture, those dark doorways and windows. It really adds like this dimension to this work that is really really compelling. Let's look at the next image. I think we have a total of five, so I'm going to just, in the interest of time. So this is the image you were talking about. I think this is the image you said that LACMA has acquired.
Yes, this is a very very special image for me. This is on Goree Island. This was one of the slave houses. This is not the only slave house with the door of no return. No return. There were many slave houses on Goree Island. This one has been made into a museum. So when I got there, with one of the people from Black Rock who was accompanying me, I just could. They were still making this house present for visitors, museum for visitors, and so I had to talk to the chief. He called himself the chief to get permission to photograph in there. That's not. This is not Photoshop. And so I told him my story. I said I came here as a daughter, a descendant of slaves. And don't you know, when I got back to New York, I did a DNA test because I kept feeling this very special link to Senegal and Dakar and the people and the women, and found out that my father, on his mother's side, descendants of the Mandinka tribe in Senegal. And so I believe that my ancestors most likely, not if not this house, one of those houses that was on Goree Island, they came through. Over millions of people were shipped off of Goree Island and sent to the New World, Brazil, United States, and very well could have been this house. And my sister recently told me how much she loved this picture. Before it's in the museum, it was in my hallway, and she told me, she said, I love this picture so much because you are like a, she said, you are like a goddess in this picture. You are blocking that door of no return. No more people will come past you to be enslaved. And that was remarkable. She said that. It's funny. I love to hear how people feel about the images and what they see. And she had never told me that before. But yes, and so I photographed myself there, and it was one of the most incredible moments of my life to return. You know what, as an African, it means to come back to the place where most likely your ancestors were sold through, and come back resplendent, educated, powerful, free, man. Mm.
I love it. I love it. So I'm keeping an eye on the time here. So what I want to do is we want to advance to the next image, but before we discuss the image, I want to get to a couple of the questions that have come in so we don't run out of time. So the first
Yeah.
question I want to ask you is, and this is from someone who's viewing now, what advice would you give to people who want to further their education on the topics that you're dealing with in your work?
You got to do the work. You got to put in the time. You got to track down um, the sources. University and college libraries around the country have incredible materials. I wasn't able to go to a lot of them, but I know that they have these materials in their archives. The archive is key. Um, Continue doing this work. It's making people mad, but they're making making them mad because the truth is coming out. But like I
Mm,
said, this has been scholars, historians, black and white scholars and historians have been doing this work for 50 plus years, tracing this, adding to this. So I would say keep educating yourself on the topic. I started by reading books that scholars and historians had wrote. I then contacted some of them. But I also, anywhere I could grab knowledge about it, and sometimes that knowledge would find me. It just jump out at you, and so that's how you continue to do the work.
Thank you for that. Another question is, when you mentioned your daughter, when speaking about your daughter, has and how she is in your work, has she ever shown any interest in following in your footsteps?
Not Yes, yes. She From the time I was in graduate school, she was 3.5, going on 4. She started calling herself an artist. So she was influenced by mama. She's in an art school, but she's into fashion, and
Got it.
so yeah, she's gonna most likely be an artist. What medium? I'm not sure.
Of course, of course. How significant has your formal education been to your success as a photographer? I think this is a good question because you mentioned feeling like you were not prepared for the professional side of your career when you got out of school.
For me, it was key because, like I said, after undergrad, there was a gap and I needed to catch up. And so I remember talking to a photographer who was self taught, and I told him I wanted to go back to school. He laughed at me. He's like, "You gonna pay for someone to teach you?" And, and I was like, but I knew I needed that. I needed it. Oh, you feel confident to be, taking your route. But I felt I always loved education. I always loved going to school. I always loved learning new things, higher education. And so for me, at that time, people were still going to into these programs. Now I can't tell somebody not to pay 6,000 a year for their degree. For me, or 30,000 for their degree, whatever it is. I wanted that master's degree. I wanted to be able to say, and I feel it did open doors. I feel it opened massive doors for me. And that a certain part of the visual arts world does still look to that. But it has to be your choice.
And I think that's the key of it. Key is that it is your choice. Because I think the person who told you that, I mean, I understand their point, but their point is not your path, right?
Right.
So they have their own path, and perhaps that perspective is perfectly fine for their path, but you're on your own journey, and you know what you need to pack for your journey. And one of the things you wanted to pack for your journey was that degree, and that's up to you, right? That's not up to somebody else, right? So I totally understand that. Someone asked the question regarding the locations that you were shooting in Dakar, maybe other parts of Africa. Are you ever nervous to go back to places like that because of that history? Does it ever affect you?
Um, I'm not quite sure what they mean, but to go back to Africa, no, absolutely. I would love to go back to Africa. I relish it. I would love to go to Tanzania, and some of the other countries in Africa, and definitely Dakar. Absolutely Senegal. I my residency was too short there, so yes, I definitely want. I've been to Egypt. Also, I did images in Egypt, not self portraits, but landscapes. I'm also very, very invested in landscapes, and and this image right here, it was taken in
Yeah.
Dakar, not Egypt, but yeah.
Well,
I
let's talk
so
about this.
this image is, the surfers would get out there every morning and afternoon, and I was just utterly fascinated because the waves on the Atlantic on the African side are just massive. I mean, and at night they get more intense, and the roar of the Atlantic, and so they were just so incredible to me, and the fearless, the surfers, the African surfers in Dakar. It's a very big thing, and so I constantly was trying to photograph, get a good representation of them. And this image in the water, not only of that, but it did remind me of the transatlantic slave trade and the bodies that are in the bottom of the ocean, the people that jumped from the ships, the people that So there's two kind of thoughts when I see this image, but also the beauty of the light, and I always look to the light. I always, and shadow is very black and white also is my first love and first ways I was trained as a photographer. So all of that is encompassed in this image.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's yeah, and it's timeless as well. There's no date, on this image. This is yesterday. This is 500 years ago. This is 500 years from now. I love that timelessness of this image. Yeah, and you caught that light. It's perfect. It's almost perfect. Like absolutely perfect. Let's go to the next image. I think we're down to the final one after this.
Yeah, this is also on the car. I spent a day, half a day really, um, going around. We had been there before too, visiting. I met one of the slavers, a descendant of one of the slavers. These men also married African women and mixed race uh, women. But this is a hospital that was, uh, I guess, during World War II or something. It's not that old in the relation to history of the island, but it was just the architecture. I'm also always looking at architecture. It plays a role in my work. Like I said, landscape as well, and so I just took myself here and put myself there. Um, and it was just fascinating to me as a structure. And I've photographed there too.
Well, thanks for sharing all of this insight on these images. I want to switch gears a little bit as we're down to our final few minutes here and just talk about sort of what you're working on these days. Like, what are you excited about? Like, what's on the, what's coming up that you can talk about?
Well, right now I'm in Rome and I'm finishing up my American Academy in Rome fellowship, and I choose to do 4 months. I wish I had chose to do a year. The climate in this country, it's so beautiful there in Montevideo, up on the hill, and I am photographing uh, the, the 2000. I'm going to site specific places where Africans, well, let me just say, people are just coming to realize that Africans have been in Europe for centuries, millennia, okay? Not centuries, millennia. Africans and Italians and Greeks, Rome, have been have had a relationship for thousands of years. They have given the Greeks knowledge, soldiers, culture, uh, and they have had this relationship, trade. And so, again, scholars and historians have been telling you this. If you go to the archives and you've been researching this, or you've taken classes in universities around the world, you would know this. And so I am in Rome photographing in sites that are significant to Roman history. And surely Africans were there, as you just seen in Gladiator 2 with Denzel Washington. I just saw the other night. Only half that story has been told, but the lid is going to be blown off of it, or is being blown off it, as filmmakers and photographers and visual arts put that story into their mediums. So that's what I'm
Hmm.
doing right now, and I bring that gold cloth with me, and like I said, it represents the feminine, divine, matriarchal lineage and lines, and it tells the story in the way that I want to tell.
What are you
So that's
looking
what I'm.
forward? What are you looking forward to?
Ah, living and doing more work, and having more time to do that work. And that's time is a gift, and I'm praying for time. And so to continue making incredible work and taking chances.
That's great. That's great. We're coming to the end now. So before we let you get on with your day, I'm sure there are a lot of people that are either watching this now or will watch this in the future that are going to deal with some of the challenges that you expressed earlier on. I mean, I hate saying, do you have any advice, but do you have any thoughts that you would share to someone who, a younger person who's just trying to figure it all out and hitting a lot of roadblocks on their creative journey?
I know. I've been there. I've been there. Surround yourself with people who love you and who want to support you. That was the key to my life and and what I have achieved right now. I was fortunate enough to have family that supported me. I know everyone can't have that, but I did, and they are the ones who said you have it, go. And of course I had this little baby, I wanted make her proud. I wanted to leave something behind. I wanted to leave a record for her. And I would say, you might feel stuck at this moment, but life is always changing. And as my mother used to say, every dog has his day. you know so it changes, and you must believe in yourself. I think at the heart of my story is there is a belief in myself. I did believe in myself. I just didn't know how to go about it. I just
Mm,
didn't know how to get there.
mm,
um so when these roadblocks came, like, when I got laid off, there was a pause. And so I took that money from when I filed my taxes, and I had been shooting analog film. But the money for that, to have processing and all that, I didn't have. So I took that money and I got a digital camera. My first digital camera. I got an iMac. I got a computer. And even though I had a little baby in a stroller pushing around my neighborhood, I began to take pictures of my neighborhood, of her. I wanted to create this family album for her. And then I had enough, boom, to apply to school. And so, there were steps. You're going to get frustrated, but if there is a dream you believe, I had been through so much working in these jobs that my time, my talent, being trying to be the best on these jobs, was gone unappreciated, doing two jobs, one person doing two, three jobs and being unappreciated. I finally said, you know what, I'll be poor if I have to do the thing I love. If that's it, then I don't care. I'll be poor. And so, but I was rewarded, and I think when you do what you love from the heart and you sacrifice a lot, you'll reward. There's got to be a reward.
mm,
Eventually, your reward is gonna. So don't give up. That is
mm,
the whole.
mm,
Don't give up, and find people who will support you, who will uh, help you. Even if I was a single mother. I was a single mother. I lived in an intergenerational household. My mother, me, my sister, and my baby. And so, I had their support. My dad also, he lived in North Carolina at that point, but he sent his love and support. I remember he came back, he would come and visit and stay with us, and I would show him my work. And I was in school at that point, the grad school. And he came and he said one night, he would always say, show me your pictures, show me your pictures. And he looked at him one night and he said, you surpassed me. And so I was so touched. So, even my classmates, when I graduated, we stayed in touch to this day. I have about three of them that I stay in touch with. I send pictures, to, and still as if we're in school. What are your thoughts? They come to my shows, actually four of them, all from grad school. And so you need that community. I've expanded the community on IG, fan base. And so you will build, you will grow, but keep focused. Keep focused. That is the thing. And even today, people still tell me, don't you stop. Don't you stop. And so that's the goal. Don't you stop.
But thank you so much for your time today, Nona, and for those words. And we couldn't end on better words than those. So I want to wish you a great evening and give my closing remarks. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you in some city sometime soon. So thank you so much. So final words. Thanks for everyone for being here for this talk. I mean, this was really, one of my faves. This was really great. The Gantt Center's goal is always to provide programs that inform and inspire. The support from viewers like you allows the Gantt Center to expand its reach and develop programs like Open Air. You can lend your support to the Gantt Center by texting "Give to Gantt" to the number 91999. Also, be sure to like and subscribe to the Gantt Center's YouTube channel for future updates on new programs and video content. I want to thank you all for joining us for today's conversation, and we look forward to next month's Open Air with artists Tunji and Jayeli Jones. Have a wonderful evening, everyone, and stay safe. Bye bye.